Good evening, and welcome to the May 25th, 2016 meeting of the Economic Development and Housing Commission. Tonight's agenda is available on the west wall counter, along with the request to speak cards. A reminder to everyone that the request to speak cards should be completed and turned in to the clerk prior to the completion of any staff presentation. For those speakers who wish to speak on items not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of this commission, please write item 1 on your card. All speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and televised for all speakers. So all speakers, in order to be recognized, must be called on by the chair and come forward to the microphone. Speaking in public may cause some individuals to be uncomfortable, so everyone is asked to be professional and respectful at all times. Commissioner Escobar, would you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Would you do, Polly, would you do roll call, please?
Michael Brady,
Present.
Ron Bragg, Nicholas Esquivel,
Present.
Mark Campbell,
Present.
Ron Price,
Present.
Veronica Smith, present, Chris White.
Present.
Okay. I think all of you have had a chance to look at the meeting minutes from our last meeting. Are there any corrections or additions from the April 26th meeting? I will entertain, if none, then I will entertain a motion for acceptance of the meeting minutes.
I move to accept the minutes.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Minutes from the April 26, 2016 minutes are approved. So we're moving now on to our regular agenda items. So item 3 is a presentation on staff progress on the development of the Pioneer Bluff Reuse Master Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Katie Yancey, a senior program manager in our department, is going to be presenting this item tonight.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. So, pardon me. In 2014, Polly, my presentation? Okay. Well, I'll talk while Polly works out the logistics of my presentation. So in 2014, the City Council approved a document called the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan. The Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan was a document that was meant to look at sort of the transition economics and the general procedures that it would take in order to transition the Pioneer Bluff area, which is south of Highway 50 and bound by the rail and the barge canal to the south, what it would take to do massive deindustrialization and bring in new backbone infrastructure in order to see the general plan vision, which is riverfront mixed use, which has been in place since the city incorporated, brought to life. And so that plan concluded that the financials worked out, that there was enough residual land value after all of the backbone infrastructure went into place in order for us to proceed. So the first threshold that we generally look at in terms of whether or not we want to develop a master plan, which is it feasible and is there a return on investment for the city, was met in 2014. Based on that analysis, the city was able to receive an award from the Strategic Growth Council for about $400,000 to develop a reuse master plan that sort of encompasses the next step of development. In July of last year, we provided an update to this commission about the progress work that had been done in implementing the action plan that was in the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan. And tonight, I'd like to walk you through the content of a proposed amendment to that Pioneer Bluff transition plan, and combined, that amendment plus the original document would sort of serve as volume one, or, you know, the first two volumes of the reuse master plan. And that would contain sort of a concentrated existing conditions assessment, as well as an update to the economics. We're doing this in part because the council has also directed us to incorporate the Stonelock District into this master plan area. And recently, the port acquired the Stonelock District. And so now, in addition to the city's holdings of the Courtyard and the port's holdings of Stonelock, a majority of this area is now held in public ownership. Well, not a majority in the true sense of over 50%, but a large amount is held in public ownership. So, yeah, there's a map that's attached to my staff report that shows these two areas in the event we can't get the presentation up and running.
It looks like we're not going to.
Okay. Well, if you'll bear with me. So, as I said earlier, the objective of the plan was to describe the transition process, and so now we're in the next phase. What we've decided to do is look at really breaking down what the transition process is. We've been working with the property owners, the South Pioneer Bluff property owners, and working internally with staff and trying to say, okay, now that we generally know that it can be done, and now that we generally have a path, what are the actual steps? And one of the criticisms that we received from the property owners about the Pioneer Bluff transition plan was that it sort of said, in a 5 to 7 year time frame, a lot of stuff's going to happen, but didn't say how it was going to happen, and didn't say what role the city would have to take, what would be the expenditures, the resources allocations that the city would have to take, and then vice versa, what were the expectations of the property owners in order to participate. All it said was, we'll incentivize early movers, but it didn't say anything about movers that were already in the process. It's important to note that the general plan since 2004 has said that no non-conforming uses are allowed to make any improvements. So for a while, the properties have just been sort of existing as they did in 2004, so we haven't seen a tremendous amount of investment. So the property owners are anxious to understand what really is their role in transitioning this property, and when would they see a return on their investment if they decided to move their businesses to another part of the city or outside of the city. So that's really sort of, we wanted to discuss in greater detail through this amendment what would be the deindustrialization process. We also wanted to talk a little bit about the land development process, which is a process that most developers are fairly familiar with, and is a fairly linear, incremental, step-by-step process. We may have, nope. And then we also were going to talk about the building development side, and we wanted to respond to another criticism we received from the property owners, which was, when am I getting a development agreement? What kind of CEQA clearance is coming out of this reuse master plan? What can I tier off of? And so we initially said, well, maybe the first thing we need to do is figure out what would a template for a development agreement look like. And we've also been directed by the council to be in a position where we can be opportunistic. And so in the staff report, it talks about this artificial separation between deindustrialization, land development, and building development. There really are a continuation, because you can't do land development without backbone infrastructure. You can't do backbone infrastructure until the interim infrastructure that's there that supports industrial uses has been transitioned, and you can't do that until those industrial uses are gone. So there is this sort of a sequence that occurs, but the city doesn't really have a role in deindustrialization, not a substantial role, and it's a little more chaotic, it's a little bit more opportunistic, and so we want to put in place a system that when we do see deindustrialization happen in the private sector, that we can quickly implement this more linear process that's associated with land development. So I was going to show you a slide of the transition timelines, and I apologize that I don't have that available for all of you. If you'll bear with me, I'll walk you through a couple highlights of the dates that are on there. So we've decided to separate business relocation and heavy industry relocation and assign timeframes for that. So we anticipate that business relocation would be happening through 2021, and that any kind of minor remediation or demolition activities would be occurring in that time frame as well, and that the heavy industry that has heavy investments in infrastructure associated with it, that would be occurring at a later date, that we would see business relocation happening through 2025 for those types of uses, and that we would be providing 5 years in addition to that, so through 2030 for remediation, as we expect that some of these heavy users would have additional remediation. And that's based on some of additional work that's been done by staff. So Nino and Moore, a consultant of ours, has just completed an area-wide assessment, and SCS Engineers has been working with staff on sort of analyzing the potential remediation for the tank farms. So we have additional information that tells us that what the process will be, and we'll be outlining that in the amendment and sharing that information with the property owners. The land development process we would expect would conclude in 2018. We would have a reuse master plan completed at that time, and it is our intent to tier off of the general plan EIR to develop our CEQA documentation. We feel like all we're doing is implementing the general plan vision and just adding additional detail that's missing there and providing an implementation plan. So we don't feel like we're deviating greatly from the general plan. We feel confident that that's a responsible approach for environmental documentation, and that we could see some development agreements happening in Stone Lock as early as 2018, because they have a separate track for developing their reuse master plan, and then seeing development agreements happening in 2020 for Pioneer Bluff proper. All in all, that gets us at about a time frame of 2022 to 2025 when we see our first buildings coming out of the ground. This is a very reasonable but aggressive schedule, and we feel confident that we've worked out all the steps that would get us to these dates. In your staff report, there was a discussion of sort of the existing economic conditions of Pioneer Bluff, and as you can see, it's not a major provider of sales tax to the city. We receive no revenue from the tank farms, and the assessed value, which would be the land and the improvements value out there, is assessed at less than $50 million. And some of that is because, again, it hasn't had a lot of investment since the 2004 general plan, and some of it's because a lot of these structures have been in place for 50 years, and they've just naturally depreciated, and because of Prop 13, they've never really seen true market values. So the city will wear different roles during this transition period. They're a property owner and they're a business owner. They own the courtyard, and they're actively pursuing courtyard relocation. Items have been going forward to the City Council, and one is going forward on June 15th, which would be an award of contract for the design and design of the courtyard. We're also working on an agreement with the port to acquire new property on West Capitol Avenue for the courtyard. The city owns the lock facility, which we are looking to start working with potentially Wood Rogers on amenitizing, and they own a 4-acre park in Stone Lock. The city will also be the land use regulator, and I talked a little bit about what that means in terms of the general plan. In the staff report, there's an update that's proposed to the general plan. This will impact Pioneer Bluff specifically. It provides more density than was originally provided in the old general plan, and so we would expect to see densities comparable to, we're targeting about 60 dwelling units to the acre. So comparable projects in the city are the West Gateway Place, the project that's under construction on Tower Bridge Gateway. That is also about 60 dwelling units to the acre. That's a 4-story building, mixed use with residential. And then there are apartment complexes in the Bridge District, the Rivermark, and the 4 habitat projects. Those are all at a roughly over 60 dwelling units to the acre. So that's a comparable sort of target density that we would be expecting to see in Pioneer Bluff. And then the townhomes that surround the Garden Park in the Bridge District, that would be a comparable density, what we would expect to see in Stone Lock based on the general plan updates. In addition to changing the zoning or sort of specifying the expectations of the zoning, I discussed in the staff report some policy changes that are coming forward to the general plan that affect Stone Lock and Pioneer Bluff. There's some additional information in the general plan about guiding staff to be, and the city to be more involved in business relocations. You can see we now can feel confident that we have those timelines based on the general plan policy that's being recommended. It's also recommending that we complete a reuse master plan. It's saying you shall complete a reuse master plan for Pioneer Bluff, and it's encouraging a reuse master plan for Stone Lock. Stone Lock has a development agreement on it now that requires at least a conceptual land use program before the property can be transacted out of the port's hands into a private sector developer. And then the last thing that's really interesting for Pioneer Bluff is that there's a policy related to rail relocation. And in the staff report, I talked about a recent study that was completed about the economic benefits of rail relocation. We're going to be talking in our amendment about the need for rail relocation in terms of local circulation. The general plan identifies rail as a hindrance to local circulation. We're going to talk about specifically what that means to Pioneer Bluff, and we presented that to the Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission on May 2nd. I included in your staff report some of the policy considerations that are related to real estate development. So the main focus of what came out of that discussion that's relevant for this commission is a desire to ensure that we design the road in accordance to TOD standards, and that we are very progressive in designing the roadway system, taking into consideration what certain new Senate bills, particularly 374, have come out that say that you will look at VMT reduction, vehicle miles traveled reduction, and you will be focusing on modal shifts, so getting people out of their cars and using other modes of transportation instead of focusing on level of service, which has been the traditional metric for looking at roads. How well do cars get through the road? How well does the segment perform? How well does the intersection perform? So we think this is very timely in light of the Broadway Bridge discussion. We also discussed with the Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission the costs of infrastructure. And I hate to say this, but the costs that we had in the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan are very low in considering what we've now discovered to be the costs. And when you take into consideration the regional costs, we're looking at probably double the amount that was included in the original Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan. So about $650,000 in backbone infrastructure is our current estimate. Million, excuse me, it's 1,000. Wouldn't that be nice? 650 million in backbone infrastructure. Thank you, Aaron. I guess a girl can dream that it would be that inexpensive. So pardon me, I'm looking at my notes here without my presentation. So the last thing that I wanted to add is that why does the city care? In addition to sort of recapturing our land and recognizing that infill development is, infill land is a precious resource, and sort of wearing our sustainability hat that we want to make sure that we're participating in the blueprint and that we're meeting our greenhouse gas emissions, there is a tremendous fiscal impact for the city. So we have to stay focused on that while we have the potential to lose certain businesses that have a long legacy in Pioneer Bluff, and certainly staff will do everything that they can to retain them, the potential assumed assessed value at full build-out is $1.8 billion in consideration to the current assessed value of $50 million. And so when you're looking at a factor of more than 50 in improvement, we really are seeing why it's worth the time to look at these things and say what role can the city play, and how proactive should they be, and what is the resource allocation that we should be providing to doing the work in Pioneer Bluff and Stone Rock. So that brings me to what would have been my final slide, which is the next steps. So we're going to be bringing this amendment to the council in the summer, and then we'll be looking to start off our visioning exercise. So, and what I mean by that is we don't know exactly what the street grid should be. We don't know exactly where we should be placing parks, because we will have to place parks besides just the Riverwalk Trail. So we're going to be going out to the public and saying, here are some ideas. Tell us what you think. We'll be bringing those back to all the commissions and asking for their input through their lens of their mission. And then we hope to return sometime in the winter to this commission with the results of that analysis. In the meantime, June and July will be spent going to all of the other commissions, so I have the privilege of seeing all of the different commissioners and asking for their input. So tonight I'd ask you to consider the timelines that I outlined for you, if you have any concerns or thoughts about that, any concerns that you have about this transportation and real estate, the policies that are set forth. I would welcome your direction, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening to me talk without the visuals.
Thank you, Ms. Yancey. Let's see. Let's go to Nick. Do you have any comments?
Yes. I apologize if this has been covered before, but are all the private business and land owners and holders in agreement and approve of the relocation or sale of their land?
No, some of them would like to very much stay and conduct their business as they are conducting. We would not force a sale of their property. We're not in a position to do that. We don't have the authority to do that, and it's not our intent.
Okay.
Commissioner White?
No questions.
No questions? Okay. Yes, Commissioner Mark?
I just had one follow-on question. How are they, I see my light's not lit. How are the private business owners feeling about the timeline?
This is actually, this timeline is less aggressive than the timeline that was included in the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan, and some of that is in response to the comments that they were receiving, which is, that we received. Some of the property owners said, we don't understand how you got to this date, we don't understand where we fit in. And so when we sat down and said, okay, we'll try to answer those questions, we realized that some of the time frames that were in the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan were right on, and others of them needed to be moved back. And so we were trying to respond, not to necessarily the time frame, but to the concern that we were not thinking the time frames through.
Commissioner Price?
It mentions a transit-oriented development. I assume that River Road and the McGowan Bridge, that'll still be a main thoroughfare from the south to the north. So that won't be in any way reduced, the River Road?
Are you referring to the section that's from Highway 50 to the Mike McGowan Bridge?
Yes.
So we haven't developed the cross-section for that road yet. The Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan talks about an 80-foot right-of-way, which roughly translates into 4 lanes, which is more than what's out there now. Could you perhaps clarify what you're in?
No, that's exactly it.
Okay.
You answered my question.
Okay.
So
I want to
then,
make sure that I did. Thank you.
then I assume the secondary roads off of that will be somewhat reduced to reduce traffic and to be more transit-oriented.
I think the intent is to make the entire grid transit-oriented. And so one of the things that we were tasked with is finding ways to connect the State Street or Old West Sacramento community into Pioneer Bluff. So I think what you'll be seeing is an attempt to, as we did in the Bridge District and as we did in Washington, to identify who the primary user is of each street, and then who the secondary and tertiary users are of each street, so we're responding to that. The notion of complete streets, which means that every user has a space for them, it works fine when you have a little bit more room to work with. Pioneer Bluff is extremely constrained, and so if we build a 108-foot right-of-way, for example, those transition economics I talked about don't work anymore. Every square foot of land is very valuable. So we're trying to balance these things. So I don't have an exact answer. We're just going to stay focused on the process and hope that the process and each step that we take in developing that street grid has check-in points like this. And then we're saying, okay, these are the possible outcomes. Which outcome does the best job of balancing all of those users' needs and balances the real estate development potential and takes into consideration the city's, citywide circulation. That's the point that we're at right now, is sort of like, who are all of our stakeholders in our street grid, and what are we trying to accomplish with this balancing exercise?
Thank you.
Commissioner Smith? Okay, I have a couple of comments. So are you considering eminent domain on the landholders or the landowners that are not willing to relocate?
No, it's way too soon to even consider something like that, and that would require direction that we've not received.
Okay. The other is, I think you ought to consider some incentivization to relocate, to have these users relocate within the city.
Okay.
From a retention, we want to keep wherever they go. We like to have them from a historic standpoint, longevity, to relocate within the city.
The Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan talks about developing an incentive package. We just haven't developed an incentive package at this point. As I was saying earlier, typically a redevelopment agency would be incentivizing those kinds of activities. We've reconstituted all of the functions. We just don't have all the tools that a former redevelopment agency has, and so we're investigating what an incentives package could look like. But at this point, we're limited in terms of what a city can do to incentivize business relocation. except for what we do so well, which is streamline permitting and looking at how we can reduce impact fees and looking at things like sewer credits, those kinds of things that we do already fairly effectively. We're just trying to figure out what we can do beyond, and we're continuing to work on that.
Yes, well, that kind of brings me to the next point, and that's with a $650 million infrastructure package, cost package, timing to the timing of the investors, and that implementation program is a part of that incentivizing the users that are there and attracting developers to partner in the costs of this. That's all a part of developing this plan, this program.
Yeah, the reuse master plan will contain an infrastructure and financing plan, and so it'll outline what we think a CFD can bear, what we think an EIFD can bear, what we think we might be eligible in terms of grant costs, what's regional, what's local, so how we would be cost sharing on that infrastructure amount.
Well, that's going to be a very important piece to have buy-in consensus from the existing landowners and in the transition plan.
Yes.
The other thing you mentioned is the density of 60 dwelling units per acre. In the master plan development, you're going to want to have a mix of the density, transitioning and tiering of density. Not, 60 dwelling units per acre is very dense. Okay.
The general plan, the proposed general plan amendment only allows density to go down to 40 dwelling units to the acre. That is the floor.
Okay,
So 60 is a target number that we would expect to see generally. The ceiling is 120 dwelling units to the acre.
Okay, but we're looking at revising the master plan or completing the master plan in 2018, correct?
Yes, but it would have to be consistent with the general plan update. We would not
Unless it's, from a planning standpoint, it makes sense to do otherwise.
That is correct.
Okay, so it's not a given, it's not locked in at this point, even though it is, you would think it would be a stone lock, but it's not.
I imagine the Planning Commission will be giving a similar direction as well, too, to consider that.
Okay, because, that's high-rise. That kind of density, 120 dwelling units per acre.
Yes, it is.
So, anyway, just a word of caution there to look at the overall master planning. Okay? That completes my comments. Anyone else have anything else? Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Yancey, for the presentation and our we will be looking forward to having this come back before us. And if it would be also important, Polly, perhaps you can have us alerted to the input plan or different times where public input is available, on the meetings you have in the public, just to kind of remind the commission on that basis so we can participate as well.
Yes, I can make sure that Polly is aware of the public meetings and that emails go out.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate them.
If I could just add really quick, I just want to commend Katie and her partner on this project is Rick Toft, who is concentrating on the deindustrialization side of things. But, this is an immense project that Katie's probably going to make the rest of her career out of. But I just want to emphasize that this has been in the making ever since the city incorporated. The city incorporated its first general plan with Pioneer Bluff as a waterfront planned area, much like the Bridge District. So we do appreciate all the comments about the sensitivity to existing businesses and trying to find homes for them in town. We actually think there's lots of places in West Sacramento that are conducive to a lot of the businesses that are, home in Pioneer Bluff. But just want to emphasize that as we get more into this, it's naturally, it brings up a lot of questions like that. But this is something that has been in the making for many, many years. I do think the property owners that are out there understand that. But of course, there's still, the pains that come along with change. And I think Katie and Rick in their work are doing a great job of balancing that. And we'll continue to make that a big focus of what we're doing out there.
This is a very exciting project, and it's good to see it move forward.
And the progress really in the last 5 years has been sort of at a pace where we didn't really expect. When you look at exactly what's happened out there in the short period of time, it's kind of made it very apparent that this can happen, and it can happen in a time frame that isn't 50 years from now. It's on the horizon. So,
Well, I think the key infrastructure that was in place is McGowan Bridge,
right.
because that shows the connectivity and really starts to drive home the idea that the infrastructure is emerging.
Right. So yeah, like Katie said, we'll be back on this item probably in different variations as we go forward. So thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item, number 4, consideration of an update on the CDBG Consolidated Master Planning Process.
So this item is going to be presented by Louise Collis, Senior Program Manager and CDBG Extraordinaire.
Ms. Collis, welcome, and we're ready to hear your presentation.
Thank you. I see that our technical difficulties have been resolved, so
Hey.
yay. Thank you. We came before you at the meeting in April, on April 25th, or April 26th, and the commission conducted a public hearing to receive public comments on our CDBG planning process. There were some comments from an attendee regarding the fact that we did not yet have the data from HUD that we were supposed to be reviewing for the consolidated plan, and also concerns that there was not sufficient notice of the public hearing, and they wanted to, this was Legal Services of Northern California, they wanted to see an analysis of some of the low-income census tracts, since we're proposing a geographic priority for the use of CDBG funds for the first 5 years of the program. So we're here this evening to give you an update on our results. We do have the data now from HUD. It's called CHAS data, Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy. We conducted a second public hearing last night, received additional public input, and we've extended the public review period, so the draft will not be available till Friday. And there'll be a 30-day public review period, and it will go before the council for final approval July 20th. So just as a quick reminder, we kind of always do this when we're talking about CDBG, is to remember that this money comes from HUD, and we have to abide by the HUD intent for the program, which is to develop viable urban communities through decent and affordable housing, creating suitable living environments, and expanding economic opportunities for our lower income families and neighborhoods in West Sacramento. These are the income limits. So the bottom line is the 80% of median income limit for Yolo County. So families and individuals whose households are at or below those income limits, depending upon how many people are in the household, are eligible for CDBG funding. We often target the lower income limits, the very low or the extremely low, depending upon the type of program or project we're talking about, just so because to address people with more significant needs. So CDBG is a very flexible funding source. It can be used for affordable housing, although not for housing construction. It can be used for acquisition and rehab of affordable housing. It can be used for acquisition of land where you can build affordable housing, but you can't use it for the construction costs. Public facilities, they have to be directly serving low-income residents, so this would be like child care centers, medical facilities, homeless shelters, parks, those sorts of, in low-income areas, those sorts of things. We can also assist with publicly owned infrastructure. Again, it has to directly serve low-income residents. We currently are doing public infrastructure in coordination with the West Gateway Place Affordable Housing Complex, because that will directly serve the low-income families in that project. Public services are any type of service that's limited to low-income people, so these would be youth programs, senior programs, homeless programs, health programs, those sorts of things. And then CDBG is also for economic opportunity. So there's two types of activities that HUD allows for that. One is the business loan program, which provides loans to businesses that create jobs for low-income persons. And the other is the micro enterprise assistance program, which provides technical assistance and grants to low-income business owners or low-income persons who want to start a business, so they would have to be a West Sacramento resident. But they have to, when I'm talking about micro enterprise, CDBG has a very, very limited definition, so that it's 5 or fewer employees. So very, very tiny mom and pop shop type of thing. I think we went over most of this at the last meeting, but examples of projects we're doing: the Westwood Gateway Place infrastructure. We've done first-time home buyer assistance. We've done housing rehab. We've done the business loan program, fair housing services, many things, but these were all under the state CDBG program. So now we will be moving into the federal program. The same types of activities are different, but we can prioritize them differently because we no longer have to think about the state scoring criteria on competitive grants. We just decide what is best for West Sacramento within the scope of CDBG eligible activities. So, funding available for the coming fiscal year. We will be kind of double dipping from both the state program and the federal program for the next 18 months. Because we have a state grant that will go through October of 2017. And it is providing primarily services, public services. We have the city's homeless outreach coordinator is funded through this, fair housing counseling from Project Sentinel, providing preschool tuition assistance to low-income families, our micro enterprise business education and grant program. And we currently are doing a public safety study with the fire department and the police department to look at their future growth and what they will need to maintain services. We also have program income on hand from the state program. And that means, you know, we did a rehab loan or a business loan or a first-time home buyer loan, and we got repayments. And that's our program income primarily from those sources. We had quite a bit on hand last year, so that's why we put a majority of it into the public infrastructure at West Gateway Place, and we're going to put $200,000 into the next phase of Bright Park. Our federal funds, we're going to get $429,000 this first fiscal year. The federal guidelines allow us to use 20% of that for general admin and for planning studies. Fair housing also goes under that too. Which leaves us about $343,000 for programs, we estimated $100,000 in program income in the coming year. Our program income, most of our loans are deferred, so we may not get anything for 3-4 months, and then we could get $50,000 all at once. So it's hard to estimate, but that's a rough number. The CHAZ data that I mentioned earlier is available through a mapping program called CPD Maps on the HUD website. And so by pulling up the city's information on the CHAZ data on the CPD Map website, we were able to show a comparison of the Census Tract 101.01, which is primarily the Washington neighborhood. It's basically Tower Bridge Gateway north up to the river, and let's see, it goes east to, I guess that would be Cagle. And, or I mean, west to Cagle. The census tract that Legal Services wanted us to look at is 102.03, which is primarily the port and the industrial area, with some very low-income residential neighborhoods kind of in the northeast corner of that census tract. The CPD mapping program is a little difficult to adjust, so when I ask for this data, it just kind of, it makes random decisions as to how it's going to be shown. But as you can see, both of those census tracts are, when that mapping program divided up and to show, the green map is median income. They're the two lowest median income census tracts in West Sacramento. And for percent of persons in poverty, they have the high, that's the purple map, they have the highest percentage of persons in poverty. This HUD data is a little behind because you'll see that it's the American Community Survey, which is a 5-year average between 2008 and 2012. So this data is from the time that was heavily impacted by the foreclosure crisis and the resulting economic recession. So we would expect to see incomes to be a little higher today, but percentage-wise, I think the percentages in those census tracts are likely very similar than they were at that time. But HUD is a few years behind on that. Oops. So here is a breakdown of some of the data. I put the citywide information, then you have the Washington census tract, and the port up to the railroad tracks. And if you look at that, you'll see that although the median household income is a little bit higher in Washington, it's still $35,000 a year, which is not pretty low. And remember that that also includes households in the rivers. So when you add that into the median, you can really see that the lower income households are quite lower than, much lower than that. The poverty rates are virtually the same, 34%. Unemployment was a little higher in the port census tract, but commute time is higher from people in Washington. And I think the reason HUD feels that that's important is when low-income people have a long commute, they have generally more expenses associated with that. If you've got children in daycare, you've got an extra, if it's a half hour each way, you got an extra hour of daycare. If you're not home to cook dinner, you've got to stop and pick up some fast food or something for dinner. And you've got the expense of a further distance in your commute. So HUD is encouraging cities to look at commutes and the cost of that as an additional piece of the housing cost, because that is associated with where you're living. Housing cost burden for those that are paying more than 30% of income is virtually the same in the two census tracts. Median rent's a little higher in the port census tract, which I was a little surprised on that. But that's what their report, this is from the census data. And there's more people in the port census tract that are, let's see, median rent as a percentage of median income is a little more off in the port tract, but it's really not that bad. It's 34%. There are a higher percentage of low-income households in the port census tract than there are in Washington. But when you look up at the top and see the number of people, there's fewer residents in that census tract. So virtually, when you're talking about low-income residents, the two are number-wise, they're pretty much the same. Do you have any questions on the CHAZ data or how we use that?
When will it be updated again?
HUD does this once a year, usually. The census data, which is the American Community Survey,
That's what I was referring to.
is available for 2 years ahead. So it says 2010 to 2014. But the census data doesn't break things down by the HUD income limits of extremely low, very low, low income. So some of this data, like poverty rate, we could get for 2014. Then again, it's a 5-year average, so it's still a little behind. But when you look at it in comparison with the HUD income limits, you can only get that from the CHAZ data set. So we could have gone with the 2014 data on some of this, but then we would kind of be comparing apples to oranges, because some of the data would be from this 2012 and some would be 2014, and I was afraid that might not be a good comparison. So we tried to stick with the same data set for everything.
Yeah, Ms. Collis, we'll go to other commissioners for questions if you want to stay there for a moment.
Okay, yeah, I've got more, but sure.
You have more presentation?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Oops. Keep clicking the wrong one, sorry. Okay, there's a number, 2 years ago, the city was involved in a very extensive, very in-detailed study of the Washington neighborhood that resulted in a sustainable community strategy we call Washington Realized. This was a HUD-funded study and set out a plan for infrastructure improvements and things that would be needed for that neighborhood to become the infill development neighborhood that the city sees it becoming one day. And kind of, just as we were finishing that study, the arena deal became real. And so that became even more critical that we have a plan for capitalizing on what's happening at the arena, but also so that we help the low-income people that are living there today who might be economically displaced if property values start to rise, rents start to rise, and that sort of thing. So there's a number of things that are in the Washington plan that would be CDBG eligible. Some of them, the majority of them are listed here. We're doing a number of these already. Infrastructure improvements, as I said, we're doing those. We are developing affordable housing. West Gateway Place is phase 1, that's 77 units. Phase 2 in a couple of years should provide, hopefully, if we can get that deal done, another up to 100 units. We've got the homeless coordinator who works heavily in that area. We're providing preschool assistance. So a lot of these things are already happening, and they are happening with CDBG funding. A number of them. So overall goals for the 5-year plan. The actual plan is going to be a little more detailed than this, but overall goals that we're proposing is to target the Washington neighborhood, and because we feel like we can get a lot more bang for the buck if we are using our CDBG funds in coordination with a lot of other funding and private resources that are going into the Washington neighborhood right now. We can capitalize on that. So the goals that we're proposing is to enhance housing choices, so increase housing choices available to the low-income residents. Promote projects that support healthy lifestyles. We have a very high incidence of child asthma, of child obesity, and in that neighborhood. That was a part of the Washington study. So we wanted to look at that also, and projects that will increase the economic opportunities, because there's no way you can build enough affordable housing for everyone that needs it. It just isn't that much money. It costs too much. So you bring the cost of housing down, but you also have to help people raise their income limits in order to help the most families possible. So that's our goal, is to look at this from both perspectives. We also want to continue to reduce the incidence of homelessness by continuing with our homeless outreach coordinator, who has been invaluable, and to look at housing solutions for homeless persons that are linked with supportive services. And actually, the services often come
first before the housing, but we want to make sure that are some housing opportunities that continue with those services so that once we get someone into housing, they can be successful and maintain their housing. And then we also want to continue with our fair housing program. We just got under contract with Project Sentinel. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're working in Sacramento right now. And so they have a hotline people can call if they feel like they've been a victim of housing discrimination. But we're also going to bring them into West Sacramento and have them do training for both tenants and landlords so that everybody understands what housing law is, what fair housing means, and how, from a landlord's perspective, how to avoid getting in trouble from a fair housing standpoint, and from a tenant's perspective, letting them understand what their rights are and their responsibilities under the law. Our next steps are, as I said, the draft consolidated plan will be available on Friday on the city's website, probably by the end of the day. It's not very pretty because it's in a HUD format, and so there's some hopefully the final one will look better. We're still kind of struggling with that, but it'll be available for a review for 30 days. So we have 30 days of comments that we will take before we do the final. And then it will go to council on July 20th. That concludes my presentation. Are there any additional questions or comments on the plan?
Commissioner Campbell, any questions?
I did have just one question. Last time we met, there was a timeline that had to be met. I'm just wondering, even though you undertook this additional work, that did not impede your submission of the application?
The HUD regs say you should have your consolidated plan in on May 15th. If your fiscal year starts July 1st, yeah, because it's got to be 45 days ahead. But HUD didn't give us our CHAZ data. We got our CHAZ data on, I think, May 13th or 14th. I mean, and it's supposed to be on public review for 30 days, and there has to be a public hearing before and a public hearing after. So we did have this discussion with HUD, and HUD said we could just go ahead and turn it in without an additional public review, but we were not comfortable with that, so they agreed that we absolutely must have it in by August 15th or the city will lose its money. As it is right now, our contract's going to be late. Normally we would have our contract in August. It's probably going to be a month late, but the city will get its money. So there's some consequence, but it's something that we feel is it's important to do the public review properly.
Okay. Let's see, Commissioner Price, questions?
I have no comments.
Okay. Commissioner Smith?
How was the turnout last night?
It was small. It was a small but group. We had 2 people from AARP, which was really good because we really hadn't had a lot of comments prior to this on the needs of seniors, other than talking to city staff that deal with the city's senior programs. So I was really happy to get that. As a matter of fact, they had a couple of comments that they wanted to see the city help some organization do wheelchair ramps and grab bars, that type of adaptation for people who are aging in place in their homes. And they also wanted to, what was the other thing? They also wanted to see, better connectivity through the Washington neighborhood and the Brighton Broderick neighborhood with complete sidewalks and complete trails that are ADA accessible. So then we had Ryan Collins, who used to be the city's homeless coordinator, and he just left. He is now working for Elika Health Centers, who do health care for indigent persons and very low-income persons, and work a lot with our homeless population. And Sergei Shurkin from Shores of Hope, used to be known as Broderick Christian Center. They've kind of changed. They used to be primarily homeless services. They've kind of changed their mission. So they do preschool for very low-income kids. They have transitional housing for formerly homeless families. They have family housing. They do job training. and job and readiness for very low-income folks, so they've got several training programs, and they're trying to develop some more. And one comment that was brought up by Sergey was that he understood that we were probably going to do some kind of infrastructure project in the first 2 years because we already have so many services and so many big projects going on with our state money. It's just capacity-wise, we would struggle if we did too many other things with our federal money until we got the state money all finished with. But he encouraged us in years 3 through 5 of the plan to look at projects that were more impactful on extremely low-income families, like permanent supportive housing or job skill type programs for very low-income adults.
All right, Commissioner White.
No questions.
Commissioner Escobar.
There was something on one of the slides that I wasn't very clear on. It said development of affordable housing, but no new construction. Can you explain that?
Because, well, it's not that we're not going to do new construction, it's just that we can't do it with CDBG. So that would have to have alternative sources. CDBG, we could go out and buy land and then bring other funding in to build on it. We can do the off-site infrastructure, we can do the sidewalks that are required by the planning department for approval of the plans and that sort of thing. But when this program was developed, the idea was, let's work in urban areas and improve them. It wasn't, let's do greenfield development. That's not what the original intent of the program is. And that's why you can't do new construction housing. You can rehab it, but you can't construct it.
So as an example project for low or for entry-level housing, you could acquire one of the motels and remodel it, right?
Depends on what you use it for when you're done with the remodeling, because then it would
Well-
not, if it was going to be, in general, that would probably be some kind of program going on, rather than
Right.
rental units. So if it's rental units, then they all have to be rented to income-eligible households. If it's a program, then it's no longer considered, under CDBG, it's no longer considered housing. It's considered a public facility. So we could do it as a public facility activity. If it
Okay.
was like transitional housing or something like that.
Is that being considered?
There are a lot of problems involved with using CDBG. First of all, we don't have that much money. We don't have nearly that much money for a motel, even an acquisition, much less a rehab on one. But with CDBG funds, if there's anyone living in that motel, we would have to pay relocation, which is also very expensive. We would have to do environmental reviews, which probably would be quite extensive on some of those motels. We would have to pay Davis-Bacon wages on any of the construction or rehab. So it becomes really expensive. And CDBG might be a piece of a project such as you suggest, but we don't have the money to fund one.
Is there a program to have the owner be a partner in the deal?
Well, that could happen. That could happen. It just depends on, but I haven't been approached by anyone, so, a lot of times those kinds of programs, the city is not the entity that does that kind of development. We're not a developer. So usually a developer would come to us with a proposal, and then we would look to see what type of
Support?
funding might be eligible, or can we provide technical assistance, that sort of thing. Yeah, it usually works more that way.
Yeah. Well, I personally think this is a huge undertaking to identify and really have the consensus from the outreach to the community and to identify key projects. And it sounds like the focus in the Washington Bright areas are key to the community. And your outreach meeting last night was in that area?
Well, it was held here, but we sent it out to the Brighton Broderick Community Action Network, and we sent it out to all the member agencies of the local Continuum of Care, which is the Yolo County Homeless and Poverty Action Coalition, which is, gosh, I probably have 30, 40 people on that list. Some of them are homeless advocates, some of them are programs that just work with very low-income people. Some of them are county, people work at the county with people on welfare and low-income and homeless programs. Yeah.
Okay.
So I sent 3 reminders. I was really hoping for a larger group, but the nice thing about a small group is we had the room scheduled for an hour and a half, and we ended up there 2 hours because the discussion just was, no one wanted to leave, so it was
Good.
a really good
Good.
discussion.
That's a great public forum for the community. Any other questions from commissioners?
I was curious, exactly how many preschool students do you anticipate having access to these resources, or do you have an idea of how many additional will be?
Well, the city has the, up for WESAC, the Universal Preschool for WESAC program. And so it has several different funding sources that it uses. So we try and focus our CDBG funds on students that are under the CDBG, or families that are under the CDBG limits, but don't fit the income criteria for other funding. They have state funding and federal funding and things. And so the amount of money we've got right now, I think we're doing about 12 a year, and this is full-time preschool. So they're, 8 to 5, they're receiving preschool, and if they are in preschool all day, it pays for preschool all day. If they're in preschool half day and childcare the other part, then the parent pays for the childcare. We can do about 12 a year we've got them in this year. That'll be another at least, we might have enough money to do like 15 next year. And then the following year will be our last round of funding, probably 12 to 15 students for that final school year.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Yes. Commissioner
Ms.
Campbell?
Collis, one last question. Well, you took you took the effort to undertake this additional work at the request of a public interest legal firm. How did they respond? They good with everything you discovered?
We sent them the information that we this analysis. I haven't heard from them yet, but they were pleased to hear that we had the additional public hearing scheduled. And so as far as that's all the comments I've heard from them so far.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Collis. Appreciate your presentation. And staff has noted the comments from the commission.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could just add, we're fortunate to have Louise with us through this transition from state to federal. She worked at a federal entitlement city 12 years ago, but having that institutional knowledge there. We've been literally counting the population increase for the last 12 years to get to 50,000 and doing backflips when we finally got to entitlement status. But it's an important transition for the city to make, and we're trying to do it in a manageable way, and Louise is a key to that, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Laurel. Let's see, that completes our regular agenda. Now we'll move on to the general administration function, part 2, item 5, requests and comments from the commissioners. Anything commissioners like to bring up? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to staff updates.
Thank you. So the main update tonight, I wanted to give you a brief rundown of the Chamber's activity over the last 2 years of their contract period. So this is actually in their contract that we do reports to this commission. We went through the change in the commission midstream, so this is the first time you're hearing this. But this is also going to City Council next week. So the report that was attached to your packet is actually from the Chamber. It's a summary of the activity that they've undertaken between the contract periods beginning in July of 2014 up through now. But I really wanted to hit the highlights and then see if Denise Seals, the Chamber CEO, is here with us tonight, see if she wanted to add anything at the end. But we've contracted with the Chamber for a number of years. I don't know exactly how many, but the Chamber has been around much longer than the city has, almost 7 decades, has over 400 members. We really, the relationship we have with the Chamber is really important to be the link between City Hall and the business community, being the voice for business. And a lot of times businesses feel more comfortable talking to the Chamber, and frankly, sometimes we feel more comfortable talking to the Chamber to get messages out to our local businesses. So that relationship has been really productive during the time that I've been around where we've had this contract. So right now, the current contract, which expires in June of later this year, we're planning to renew that for 2 years. We have the authority to do that at the staff level. But the main functions are business retention, so doing visits and outreach to new businesses and existing businesses. The chamber also reviews updates to development impact fees, city regulations, that sort of thing. They help us with advocacy on legislation. And probably their most visible thing they do, and definitely not the least of importance, is event production. Everything from State of the City to the Christmas tree lighting to the farmer's market, which has started, by the way. It's every Thursday, so you should definitely plan on going. So the emphasis on business retention, though, is in this contract, and that's because the city, when we looked at kind of what we do, where our deficiencies are, we noticed that, okay, well, there's a lot of business retention activities we'd like to be doing, but we don't have the staff resources to do it. So the chamber's really stepped in the last 2 years and done a lot of what we have wanted to do on our own, but it's been really important to get out and talk to existing businesses about their issues. Denise and her staff have personally met with over 150 businesses in that period. But out of that, I want to point out, they've identified at least 11 direct referrals to city departments that have resulted in issues being resolved between a business and the city. So whether it was something that, a question they had or something more serious, the chamber's been integral in keeping that good relationship between the city and its business community going. The Chamber's Economic and Government Affairs Forum, I don't know if any of you, I'm sure at least Chris and Michael have been to that before, but it's a forum where local businesses can come to a morning meeting. It's very informal, and city staff and sometimes other guests come and talk about an issue that would be of importance to the business community. And it's been a great way for us to get feedback before we hit the commissions or the council with an item. We go to that forum and get immediate feedback, and that's been really productive. Of course, Cap to Cap and other legislative advocacy, they've been really involved in that. And I already mentioned the events, but I really want to point out the farmers market. I also want to acknowledge Chris White as a chamber board member and her role on the farmers market, but also, of course, Denise and her staff. The market is really driven by the chamber. It's been, the reality is it's tough to get a farmers market going, and they're really doing their best and putting a lot of resources and effort into the local market. And so it wouldn't be happening if it hadn't been for the chamber. The Dig In Dinner series, the other events that are geared towards children or other topics that are of interest to the community. And most recently, they have a new partnership with the Center for Land-Based Learning to kind of run the market side of things. Those are all really creative things that they've come up with to make the market more viable. Particularly the dinners have been really successful. So really wanted to highlight that as one of the things that has been most important over the last 2 years. So that's the summary of the report. Again, I'll let Denise give her any input she wants to add. But before I do that, Denise is retiring. I don't know if you all know that, but it's in August. And I just want to say, I just want to publicly acknowledge her for the first time. Hopefully I have other chances to do this, but there's a few people I would recognize as putting as much heart and soul into this community as she has in the time she's been a chamber member and a resident. She served on commissions. It's been a pleasure to work with her, and it's not going to be the same, but the chamber's in great shape thanks to Denise's leadership. Has, like I said, over 400 members. We're a small town. It's a small town chamber, and often that in a lot of cities is not, it's kind of a symbolic thing. Our chamber is not that. Our chamber is a force, and really a lot of the success we have on the economic development side is in partnership with them, and that business relationships that we have, and the overall reputation that West Sacramento has as a business-friendly community is thanks in large part to Denise's work. So just wanted to acknowledge her and invite her up to give any additional feedback. Thanks.
Ms. Seals? Welcome.
On the microphone. Thanks so much. And thank you, commissioners. Thanks for taking the time. I'm here to answer any questions you might have around the performance aspects of our contract. to thank you all for your time and engagement in what certainly the Chamber considers an essential commission to the success, the economic success of our community moving forward. I know a couple of you very well because you sit on our board. Chris White will be our incoming board chair. And it's been 69 years. The Chamber has been around for 69 years. And it's, in the last almost 2 decades, it's been a pleasure to work. First as a business, representing a business, a large local business, and then as the CEO of the Chamber. If you had any specific questions about any of the items, I'm happy to fill you in, or I have a couple of anecdotes that you might enjoy related to recent business retention efforts in collaboration with the city.
I would like to hear your anecdotes.
A classic example of the business retention services that Aaron was talking about earlier might be a phone call that I got last week from a very distraught business owner. It's a moving and storage business, and they'd chosen to stay, to expand and stay, and increase their job workforce size in the city of West Sacramento. So they purchased this property and they moved. And not uncommon to a number of businesses, as you get in the excitement of moving and relocating, there seem to be some gaps that led to a challenge with an occupancy permit. And they were in a pickle. Yeah, but clear heads and a call to the building department and the building official here, the fire marshal. There was a meeting the next morning, and there's an action plan. And so that business's services were not disrupted. And that's a great, that they would have found their way through, but because for decades, the close collaboration between the city and the Chamber and the business community through the Chamber, sometimes it just takes a phone call and a calm voice and let's get a plan and you're going to be okay. We also have been working with a group of businesses in the River Point Shopping Center. They had a considerable, 2 of those large international businesses own their property in that center and have been having just an increasingly untenable problem with homelessness. Our homeless folks are residents of our community, and they have rights like every other resident in our community. But their situation had developed to the point that they were up in restaurants going through trash cans, and both of these large international businesses are, in many cases, the first introduction to our community in Northern California. Folks come from Redding, from the Oregon border, from the foothills to shop at what is a unique store. And a call to the city, they talked earlier about the homelessness coordinator and a group from PD and Parks, and we said, and the local reclamation district, not RD 900, but RD 537. And we sat down and started a conversation. We met every other week, and 8-9 weeks later today, we didn't call the media, we didn't have a parade. We used a number of what had been really successful outcomes pulled from the Bridge to Housing project, and with private dollars and the reclamation district and the city resources that they had available today with proper notice, a dozen folks were involved initially. We have a pregnant woman and her husband and her boyfriend that have been moved into housing. We connected 3 folks with employment services through the One Stop, and after about 6 weeks, we had 3 people left. They moved on, and the cleanup began today. And that's the kind of, it's great when a plan comes together, right? And you think of the reclamation districts are their own jurisdiction, international companies. They looked for the resources that they had available and they made it work for a good outcome. And so I think that that's another, from a large sales tax base, it's a great outcome for a problem. So that's a good example of some of the solutions that we've been able to work together with business and city. You know, this is a community, from its residents to its elected leadership to certainly its stellar city staff to folks that are as engaged as you guys are on a commission. We look for, how do we make this happen? Okay, well, so here's the situation. How do we make this happen? And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, look at West Sacramento. We're the rock stars right now. So I would say that's been one of the most pleasurable and successful aspects, I think, of our contract.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions of Ms. Seals? Well, first of all, congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you.
And I think the kudos really go for the farmers market. The community cross-connectivity that has been brought forth and continues to be expanded in that venue is terrific.
Thank you. Let me give you a little background on the farmers market. We spent 2 years in planning with the Davis Farmers Market. We surveyed locations, we surveyed farmers, we knew that there was direction from council and certainly from the city team that we wanted this to be not only, you know, fresh fruits, vegetables, access in that way, but also a community building enterprise, something that creates warmth and fiber for kids growing up in this community. And so once West Cap had been selected, we shut down. So this is our 6th year. We spent 2 years in the lot over by Los Rios, and then this is the 4th year in the middle of West Cap. We shut down both sides of West Capitol Avenue from 2 o'clock until 8 o'clock every Thursday, and amazing things happened. Before we had our very first market, we ensured that we had access for all of our residents. We have EBT, we take the senior nutrition and the mothers and infant children nutrition coupons. We have events at the market, not just the dig-in dinner, which I would invite you all to check out and consider. It's a really unique experience. But we also have a kids zone sponsored by Capitol Bowl the first Thursday of every month. And at that kids zone, everything for a kid to do is free. There are bounce houses. There's face painting. We have musical acts for kids, live music for kids, and as a result, at the first market last week, kids that have been coming to our market since they were 2 are now 8, and the first thing they do is hustle over to the information booth to get a hug, to get a sticker, and to find out what's happening. That is a measure of success. We also, at the Kids Zone, thanks to Capitol Bowl, we have a Sprouts Club. Every child between the age of 4 and 11, doesn't cost them anything. They come and sign up with us, and we give them a little stamp. They get $2 to spend on fruits and vegetables at the farmer's market. And you would think that we were handing them a 20. I mean, they are so excited and engaged, and they're forming relationships with farmers. They're forming relationships with the people that grow their food. That makes this a very special space. So we know, because we surveyed the heck out of it, we know people want to live in a place that has a farmer's market. Everyone likes the idea of a farmer's market. The challenge, and actually a challenge that I would put out to all of you, I see Michael and Chris on a regular basis, is farmers need customers. People need to make the effort to go to a farmer's market. And these kids that are learning to purchase their own produce and from the people that grew it are also learning to cook with Chris Yarosh, who is the chef and entrepreneur of Broderick and every other restaurant that's opening up in the next 6 months all over the region. He comes out and cooks with kids. He teaches them what to do with a tomato. I mean, you can get a kid to eat a strawberry or a cherry. A tomato, a piece of squash, you know, if that's on pizza, that's a different story. And so they cook with a chef, they have a great time, and Whereas a lot of older residents in this town, if you ask them where the center of West Sacramento was, that might be a difficult thing for them to define. But the kids that come to that farmer's market, all, over 300 of them that come, they'll tell you it's right here. It's where the Christmas tree is lit. It's where the farmer's market is. It's where they can go bowling. It's where they can go shopping. And look here, City Hall. So that, as it relates to the market, is a big win. And your help in supporting that market would be really appreciated.
And tell your friends.
And your friends' friends, and your
Yes.
Facebook page. And we have almost 3,600 followers on our Facebook page for the market. So because it's a unique market, because we work with small farms, small Yolo County farms, really actually locally grown, like next to the firehouse or up in Broderick. This new relationship with Center for Land-Based Learning creates a perfect venue for them, for their farmers. It also completes that circle of how food gets from a seed to a little kid's $2 investment.
So I have a question for you. I haven't seen stew around for a while. Is that because of the cooking of the tomatoes or what?
We have it's because of practicality. For the first couple of years, we have a big tomato, like mascot costume thing that on your average farmer's market day probably gets to about 200 degrees inside of it. It's pretty fragrant right now, and I would say that the stew the tomato is gone a little south, but we have volunteers, but no one ever volunteers twice, so.
Okay. Any other
Any questions, any feedback? Have you been to the market? You have any feedback for us? Anything it's fresh and it's local, so as a result, no, there might not be artichokes there. Because if you see an artichoke in a farmer's market, it's not very likely it grew in the Central Valley. You could probably grow one or two in your yard, but you're not going to have dinner.
Wow. Thank you very much for your presentation and answer to comments and your anecdotes and also for your service.
Thank you. It's been an honor. It's a great place. I have the best job on the planet. If you know anyone that might be interested in that job, they should go to the Chamber's website. I have the best job in the best city with people I love, and I think it's important to leave while all those things are still true. So I will leave you with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Going to calendar of events. Next meeting is July 27th, so mark your calendars accordingly. 6 o'clock here. Yes.
And just a few other things that are coming up on the calendar you may be of interest to you. We were talking about the farmer's market every Thursday. May 28th, it's a Saturday. You may have heard of this project out there. Bridgeway Play is a neighborhood organization down in the Bridgeway Lakes Park. They're opening a new play structure at that park at 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturday the 28th. So if you're interested, you're welcome to attend that. A couple other grand openings. Friday, June 17th at 10 a.m. The southern portion of Village Parkway will be opening. So the Village Parkway, that's the portion that goes from Gregory all the way up to basically where you start to see houses on the east side of Southport. So that road is replacing South River Road with the new levee project. So it's probably the best kept secret out there that this road has been constructed in the last 6 months. But you're welcome to attend that. And then finally, Friday, June 24th, Joey Lopes Park will be having its grand opening. That's the park that is on Sycamore in West Capitol. It's a really, really nice park, about $5 million in grant funds that went into it. So come check that out as well. If you have questions about logistics on any of that, especially on the Village Parkway, I'm not exactly sure yet where we're going to meet, but contact Polly if you want to attend, and we can get you that information. So thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. At this point, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second. Great. We have a motion, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, aye. Great. I think we're adjourned.